Even the SEALs lowered their weapons. Can you imagine that? The most elite soldiers in America, trained to never surrender, forced to bow their heads in a deadly valley in Nevada. But just when everything seemed finished, a woman unarmed, without command, carrying nothing more than a clipboard in her hand, stepped forward, and what happened next turned the entire battlefield upside down. This was not just a fight. This was a story that will make you ask yourself, have I ever underestimated the wrong person? In the mountains of Nevada, near the Fallon military training grounds, there exists a barren stretch of land that American soldiers whisper about with a short, chilling name, the Hollow. The name sounds like an empty void, harmless and still, but anyone who has ever set foot there knows the truth. It is no vacant ground but a gaping mouth, swallowing entire units of soldiers and holding them at the bottom in the cruelest ways imaginable. In just 6 months, 3 special operations teams had gone in, and none of them ever returned whole. Even the Navy SEALs, the undefeated pride of the United States military, had left their dead in that place. For the men stationed at Fallon, the name The Hollow did not stir curiosity. It felt more like a gravestone already carved, waiting for the names of those about to enter, with no chance to etch an exit. That morning, the desert wind swept across the valley, carrying fine dust and the heavy stench of engine oil. Helicopters descended, rotor blades shrieking as they sliced through the air, hurling sand and gravel into thick rolling clouds. And in the middle of that searing gust, a woman appeared. No gun, no armor, nothing about her resembling a warrior about to step into a death zone. In her hand, she carried only an old clipboard, and over her shoulder, a faded canvas bag hung loosely. The guards nearby raised their brows, smirks tugging at their lips, as if they had just witnessed a comedy scene. They actually sent an office clerk out here? To them, Fallon was a place where sweat mixed with dust, where rifle fire rang out each night. Her arrival felt like a librarian stumbling onto a football field out of place, unnecessary, almost absurd. And yet, for anyone who cared to look closer, there was something subtle but strange. While the other soldiers squinted and winced against the storm of sand, she stood upright, unflinching, eyes steady, staring through the dust storm as though she had lived inside it all her life. No hurried movements, no sign of fear. Amid the chaos of men and machines, her stillness was, in itself, the most unusual thing. The Fallon base lay not far from civilian towns, yet its air could not have been more different. There were no bustling saloons, no familiar twang of country music, only concrete walls, coils of razor wire, and faces weathered by daily proximity to death. In a place like this, men measured each other's worth by the weapons they carried, by the number of times they had crawled out of hell alive. No one cared about a woman with empty hands, silent lips, and faraway eyes. But perhaps it was exactly that silence which unsettled a few. Some exchanged glances, quietly asking themselves, if she really were nothing more than a desk observer, why did she step down as though she had been standing there forever? Time crept forward. The SEAL team readied for their patrol into the Hollow, checking weapons, loading magazines, tightening straps. The woman remained, never intruding, never speaking much, only scribbling quietly, like a shadow at the edge of vision. Yet anyone observant enough might have noticed the way her eyes moved across the terrain map. It wasn't the gaze of a supply clerk. It was the gaze of someone rereading a familiar book, page after page, only to ensure that no one had dared alter the words inside. And then, hours later, once the team had pushed deep into the valley, the first signals on the radio began to falter. Static, the hiss of wind cutting through, then silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Communications collapsed, as though the Hollow had devoured not only human lives but also the very waves of sound and signal. And at that moment, the unthinkable happened. The most elite soldiers in America, men who had never entertained the word surrender, began lowering their weapons, bowing their heads into the quiet. On the ridge above, the woman still sat, binoculars in hand, What reflected in her eyes was not a failed mission, but a problem waiting to be solved. And only minutes later, while others stood frozen in disbelief at the helplessness of battle-hardened men, she did the unimaginable. She rose, lifted her canvas bag, and walked straight into the death zone that the entire base had already accepted as a mass grave. Her name was Catherine Hale, 41 years old, with the rank of lieutenant colonel. On paper, everything appeared neat and orderly. A logistics officer, specializing in data analysis, transferred from the Pentagon to Fallon under the assignment of observing battlefield operations. From the stiff, bureaucratic wording of the orders, no one could find anything remarkable. And that became the first impression soldiers at the base had of her. A desk worker, an outsider, who had stumbled into a land not meant for her. At Fallon, a person's worth was not written in files, nor stamped with red seals. It was measured by how many times they returned from hell, by the scars hidden beneath sunburnt skin, by how swiftly they could dismantle an M4 rifle in the dark. Catherine had nothing to flaunt. Her uniform bore no shining rows of ribbons. Her boots were so worn that anyone could tell they hadn't crossed the brutal front lines in years. To the younger soldiers, that image alone was enough to conclude she did not belong here. While everyone rushed to prepare for the morning briefing, Catherine sat in the corner of the room, clipboard resting neatly on her knee. She wrote steadily, line after tilted line of handwriting, even as satellite maps, marked with red symbols like bloodstains, were spread across the table. No one paid attention, or rather, no one wanted to. It was hard to respect someone who entered this unforgiving space looking so procedural. Captain Marcus Reed, the SEAL team commander, was not the kind of man to hide his feelings. His face carried the permanent scowl of someone who had seen far more than he cared to retell. And when his eyes fell on Catherine, he let out a dry, exasperated breath. We're losing men every week in the Hollow, and they send me, a logistics officer, to observe. The men around him chuckled under their breath. They didn't need to add anything. Their disdainful glances spoke loudly enough. Catherine did not respond. That was what unsettled people. Most, when doubted and belittled, would attempt to prove themselves with some quick retort. But she didn't. She remained silent, as though his words had slipped away into the air without leaving the faintest scratch. Her eyes were so calm that some even wondered, had she truly heard him at all? From the outside, Fallon Base was nothing more than hurriedly built concrete walls, stark white modular barracks, and tin-roofed watchtowers flashing blinding sunlight. But inside, it was dense with tension. People lived each day aware that tonight could very well be their last. Meals in the mess hall were quieter than in any town saloon, because every conversation faltered once someone mentioned the Hollow. The base was like a bar without music, where everyone drank but no one dared to clink glasses. In that atmosphere, Catherine became an awkward shadow. She did not drink the strong black coffee the soldiers favored, but instead chose pale tea bags so weak that one sergeant mocked her, saying, "Might as well be dishwater." She never laughed loudly, never joined in on the scattered jokes after drills. Yet her very silence seemed to irritate some. In a place where men shared even their breathing space, her quiet felt like a refusal. Still, small moments sometimes revealed larger truths. Once, when a gust of wind knocked down part of the map tacked on the wall, Catherine rose without hesitation, reassembling the scattered sheets with uncanny precision. She didn't need notes, didn't need to ask, as though she remembered every coordinate by heart. A non-commissioned officer blinked for a moment, then scoffed. "Guess she's good at puzzles." It was meant as a jab, but in a few pairs of eyes, a spark of doubt flickered. The image of Catherine with her old clipboard quietly writing line after line slowly became routine. She was overlooked in briefings, dismissed as a formality. Yet within that dismissal, a truth was silently taking root. She was always present, always remembering, always watching. In the military, there was an unspoken rule. Anyone who stayed silent for too long either knew nothing or knew far too much. With Catherine, no one dared to guess which one it was. And then one evening, as Reed stood on the balcony, gazing out over the pitch-black desert, he caught sight of Catherine walking past the guard post, notebook in hand, eyes lifted toward the thick canopy of stars. For a moment he was thrown off balance. Not because of her beauty, nor because of her difference, but because of something far harder to explain. She stood there as if searching for something beyond the confines of paper orders. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. That morning the room was suffocating under the harsh fluorescent lights and the tension that had long since become routine at Fallon. The satellite map of the hollow was spread across the table, its fine lines like blood vessels cutting through the barren land. They spoke of strategy, of movement, of suspicious points where an ambush might wait. Catherine sat at the end of the table, clipboard neatly in place, pen moving steadily. She was so silent it was almost as if she weren't there. Then, in the middle of a young officer's report that the terrain had no clear cover for hiding, Catherine suddenly stopped her pen. She lifted her head, her voice calm yet clear enough to halt the entire room. In the afternoon, which way does the wind blow there? The air thickened instantly. A question that sounded harmless, almost trivial, fell like a stone into the heavy silence. Marcus frowned, irritated, as though someone had just interrupted a chess match he was pouring his mind into. He gave a curt reply, southeast to northwest. Catherine only nodded, then lowered her gaze and continued writing, not another word spoken. But in that moment the atmosphere shifted. The veterans, those who had survived more than once from that deadly abyss, began exchanging glances. That was not the question of a logistics officer. That was the question of someone who had once read the language of the wind, who had survived by understanding how earth, sand, and shadow spoke to one another. A sergeant exhaled softly, whispering just loud enough for the man beside him. She asked that like, she's fought there before. The days that followed, Fallon felt different. Catherine hadn't changed, still the weak tea, still the clipboard, still the quiet footsteps down the corridors. But others had changed. Instead of indifferent stares, now they began to watch her. Some tried to probe, throwing out meaningless questions about maps, about communication systems, just to see if she would respond like a true desk officer. And sometimes, Catherine would drop a small remark, seemingly offhand, yet so precise it sent chills through the listener. For example, when a group of SEALs debated the safest approach route, she gently noted, "That valley, in summer, the ground temperature runs nearly 15 degrees hotter than outside. It'll light up thermal sensors instantly." The table went silent. A young soldier stammered, half joking, half uneasy, "Where'd you read that, Wikipedia?" The line drew a few nervous chuckles, but the laughter died quickly when they caught the calm, unblinking look in Catherine's eyes. There was something about this woman that went far beyond her military record. And the whispers began to spread. Perhaps Catherine had once been part of a program no one was meant to know about. Reed, though trying to keep his cool, could not shake the unease building inside him. He recalled the night he had seen Catherine standing beneath the star-filled sky, and now added to that the unsettling fragments of her uncanny knowledge. No one could merely be an observer and ask about the wind in a valley of death. Fallon, long accustomed to tension, now carried something else, curiosity. And sometimes, curiosity could be more powerful than fear. The soldiers at the base began gossiping behind her back, giving Catherine nicknames half mocking, half in awe. The Wind Witch, the Living Map, or more simply, the one who knows too much. Catherine seemed not to care. She kept her own steady rhythm of life. But one truth could not be denied. Somehow, she had forced those who once dismissed her to stop and take notice. And at Fallon, where a name could vanish overnight with a single failed mission, making others look at you that way, was the difference between being invisible and existing. What made a woman with such a plain logistics record know the hollow so intimately? The answer remained hidden, and the more it stayed hidden, the more it gnawed at those around her like a thirst that could not be quenched. And then, during another briefing, Reed caught a glimpse of Catherine as she held her pen, her eyes flashing for just an instant as they rested on the map. It was not the gaze of someone learning. It was the gaze of someone who had already returned from that place. The barren valley lay still beneath the blistering noon Sunday. The SEAL team had pushed into the hollow in search of 2 missing comrades, while Catherine, as protocol dictated, remained on the high ground to observe. To them, she was still just the desk woman, an auxiliary link, not important enough to risk herself in the circle of danger. Yet only an hour later, the air grew suffocating. The radio began to crackle with interference, signals cutting in and out, then silence. And this silence was not the natural kind, but a warning, a prelude to catastrophe. Catherine raised her binoculars. Through the shimmer of dust and heat haze, she caught sight of motionless shapes. They weren't rocks, nor shrubs. They were snipers, camouflaged with terrifying precision, spread like a tightening noose around the SEALs. And then, what made her heart stop? The most battle-hardened soldiers in America, men who had walked into the jaws of death and returned, were now lowering their weapons. One by one, rifles dropped into the dry sand, hands lifted high in surrender. In that moment, Catherine was no longer the faint shadow in the corner of a briefing room, nor the logistics lieutenant on paper. She bent down, unzipped her pack. The sound of metal clicked sharp and clean. Inside were not files, not notebooks, a sidearm, a compact rifle with suppressor attached, and a weathered sling so old the fabric had faded to pale. With no hesitation, her hands moved as though replaying a melody she had long mastered, releasing the bolt, chambering rounds, checking the firing pin. Quick, efficient, cold motions that could only belong to someone who had done it thousands of times before. In that instant, a secret was exposed without a single word spoken. The woman they all dismissed as desk-bound did not merely know about wind direction or ground temperature. She knew how to make a weapon an extension of her body. Catherine's fingers did not tremble, did not stall. On the contrary, they were fluid and exact, so much so that one might have thought of a pianist at work, but instead of ivory keys, she played on the trigger. She crouched low, chose her perch along the ridge. Every breath was measured, mechanical. Below, the enemy closed in on the SEALs, while Reed and his men stood powerless. From a distance, anyone might have believed the game was finished, but Catherine knew, when everything appears to collapse, that is the moment the board can be turned. The first round slipped from the barrel. The muffled shot vanished into the desert air as though it had never existed. But down in the valley, one black figure stiffened, then crumpled. Catherine's rhythm did not break. A second shot, a third, each one clean and absolute. Enemies fell, one by one, before they even grasped what was happening. On the ground, Reed froze. He looked upward, scanning desperately for support. No aircraft, no reinforcements, only the faint echoes drifting from the ridge. And in that fleeting second, a question surged unbidden into his mind. Who, truly, was protecting his team? But Catherine had no time for sentiment. She knew every shot was a declaration, and the longer she lingered, the greater the chance she'd be exposed. As the enemy's noose began to unravel, she descended, her small frame slipping through rock and sand as if every contour of the land had been etched into her memory. There was no clumsiness of an outsider, only the lethal efficiency of a seasoned warrior. Closer now, she spotted an enemy creeping up behind the SEALs. Instead of firing, Catherine drew a blade from her boot. to her movements so swift, so precise, it chilled the blood. A single ruthless twist, and the man collapsed without breath. Calmly, she picked up his fallen weapon, gave it a quick check, and pressed forward. Her presence, though unseen in full, was felt unmistakably. The SEALs sensed it in the sudden shift, the unexpected reprieve, the balance tilting in their favor. Someone had intervened. And the only one on high ground, the only one cut off from the radio, could be none other than Catherine Hale. Before Reed's eyes, the curtain began to lift. Catherine was no longer a vague, unanswered question. She was becoming the dangerous answer to them all. The battle in the valley had not yet drawn its curtain when another chapter silently unfolded. Catherine did not charge down to share the chaos with the SEALs, as every pair of eyes expected. Instead, she turned, quietly beginning her climb up the opposite ridge. There, in the place no one thought to look, the enemy had built an entire web of ambush. Every step she placed on loose stone, every breath she took was measured and cautious, yet her eyes remained sharp, cold, as though tracing a map carved long ago into her memory. At the first position, the silhouette of a sniper lay still, disguised as a rock melted into the terrain. Catherine did not hesitate. 3 shots clean, precise ended him before his barrel could even swing in her direction. A final gasp slipped out, but not from Catherine. It came from the fallen soldier, his eyes still wide open in disbelief at what had just happened. She moved on, sliding through dry dust, reaching a second cave. 2 enemies crouched inside, weapons ready, waiting for the SEALs to walk into the kill zone. Catherine wasted no time on a duel. She pulled a pin, tossed a grenade. The explosion thundered across the hill, echoing like the drum of death. When the smoke cleared, the cave lay in absolute silence. Another lethal corner erased from the enemy's hands. Then came the highest point, a sniper nest, with a clear line of control over the entire valley. There were no trees here, no cover. She was forced into the open, sprinting as she fired. 3 successive rounds, sharp and decisive, left no one alive to respond. The ambush collapsed, and with it the greatest threat. In the valley below, the SEALs were still stunned. They had always trusted their own skills, believed there was no battlefield beyond their grasp. Yet today, the tide had turned because of a woman they once thought belonged only behind a desk. The gunfire from above had not only reversed the fight, it had shaken the pride of the most seasoned warriors. Then the radio crackled, shattering the stunned silence. Echo 1, proceed forward. The grid is clear. Catherine's voice came steady, cold, calm, as if she were reading a weather report. No theatrics, no tremor. The SEALs glanced at one another. In that moment, respect mingled with unease. Who was she, truly? A strategist who happened to handle weapons? Or a buried past, now beginning to rise? Reed, standing amid the dust, felt the weight of doubt grow heavier. He had seen many soldiers in his life, but never anyone who moved and fought with such near-inhuman precision. Every gesture Catherine made spoke of something she had never confessed. She had not learned this from books, nor from conference rooms. This was instinct carved into her blood, a craft only forged in the fire of real war. In his mind, a hazy memory stirred. Years ago, on a covert mission in the Balkans, he had once heard whispers of a name, the Wraith, a female phantom of intelligence circles, whose appearance could redraw entire maps of war. He had never believed the half-myth, half-rumor. But now, staring at Catherine with a rifle in her hands, a chill ran down his spine. Up on the ridge, Catherine did not pause to savor victory. She kept scanning, checking blind spots. Every time she lifted her scope, her eyes lit with that hardened look of one who had lived too long with death only a breath away. But buried deep beneath the coldness was something else. A flicker of fatigue, an emptiness known only to those who have carried secrets too long. To ease the tension, a young SEAL muttered, half joking, "Maybe tomorrow I'll ask to move to desk duty. Seems safer." A brief laugh rippled out, easing the strain, but the curiosity remained. Because they knew, war is never that simple. Catherine slung her pack once more, carefully concealing her weapons. With those same cold eyes, she swept the valley one last time, then quietly turned her radio back to silence. Outwardly, she had saved the seals, but inwardly she had opened a door, one that others would eventually step through. And then, as if fate itself had chosen the timing, an answer came to Reed's unspoken question. From behind her, a voice rose low, rough, and familiar, not belonging to any seal. A voice Catherine had thought she would never hear again. A figure emerged from the cliff face, eyes locked on hers, carrying with them the very past she had tried to bury. At the very moment the helicopter lifted off, dust swirled into a choking storm. The seals watched their two teammates being carried away, exhausted, battered, but still alive. They knew with absolute certainty, without Catherine Hale, the hollow would have become a mass grave today. Amid the smoke and rubble of battle, a strange sensation crept into their hearts, part relief, part suspicion, a tension no words could easily explain. Marcus Reed, standing in the jagged night among broken stones, turned toward Catherine. Her shirt was soaked in blood, her shoulder wrapped in a hasty bandage, yet her stance was unshaken. He let slip a question that seemed simple but struck like a hammer. Who are you, really? The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. And instead of an elaborate explanation, what he received was blunt, dry, stripped of all comfort. I do logistics for operations that never make it into the records. The seals froze. Logistics? The word sounded ordinary, almost dull compared to what they had just witnessed. Yet it was precisely the calm in Catherine's voice that made the statement more terrifying than any classified file. That night, Fallon lay silent. When Reed returned to the barracks, all traces of Catherine had vanished as if she had never existed. Documents were neatly handed over, her room scrubbed clean, no personal belongings, not even a scrap of paper left behind. Only an unsettling emptiness remained, as though she had been nothing but an apparition placed at the right moment. The next morning, as Reed stepped into the operations center, something unusual caught his eye. On the board, crammed with orders and encrypted directives, a small piece of cloth had been pinned. It was crudely stitched with the outline of a jagged valley, the image of the hollow, and just beneath it, a short line of text. Hale, confirmed. No one admitted to placing it there. No one knew whose hands had sewn it. But every man in the room understood. Catherine Hale was not merely logistics. She had just been confirmed not by paperwork, but by blood and by the ghosts of war itself. Reed stood motionless before the cloth, memories rushing back. Years ago, in the Balkans, whispers had spread of the Wraith, a female phantom in the intelligence world, whose presence alone could alter the entire color of a war map overnight. No one had ever seen her, no one had ever recorded her. It was nothing more than rumor among special forces, a story told to rattle rookies. Yet now Reed could not shake the thought. Was Catherine Hale the very name behind that myth? The other SEALs chose a different way to cope. One of them cracked a joke, half serious, half in jest. If this is logistics, then I swear I never want to meet the frontline division. Laughter broke out brief, necessary, cutting through the heavy air. But even as they laughed, there was a flicker of fear in every man's eyes. Not fear of the enemy, but of the truth about the woman who had vanished like a ghost. In the official reports sent to higher command, Catherine was mentioned only as an officer of document transport. Not a word about the gunfire on the ridge. Not a single line about the precise shots that saved the entire team. Everything was buried in silence. Just as she herself had once said, operations that never make it into the records. Yet in Fallon, every soldier knew a phantom had entered their lives and then disappeared. Reed could not sleep for many nights. Again and again, he replayed every detail. Catherine's footsteps on the slope, her cold eyes as she pulled the trigger, her steady voice over the radio. Each piece was a fragment of something larger, hinting at a truth far greater than he could assemble. Once, half in jest, he asked a comrade, "If the wraith were real, what would you think?" The man shrugged, replying, "If she is real, then she chose the perfect moment to show up. But I only hope she's never our enemy." The words struck Reed with unease, because he knew those who could erase themselves from all records rarely worked for just one side. In the darkness of Fallon, the unspoken question lingered. Where had Catherine Hale gone, and more importantly, would she return? Perhaps she had vanished to continue another mission, one no one was permitted to know. Perhaps she had left to end the blood-soaked chain of memories even she wished to forget. But one thing was certain: whenever the name Hale surfaced again, it would carry a storm no map could ever predict. On the bulletin board of Fallon, the small cloth remained, untouched. It became a silent emblem, a reminder that not all heroes wear official ranks. Some walk in shadows, take no medals, yet rewrite the fate of battlefields, and Catherine Hale was one of them. A legend often begins not with trumpets, but with silence. At Fallon, that silence carried the shadow of Catherine Hale. No classified reports were needed, no medals ever awarded, yet the story of the woman behind the desk spread faster than the gunfire that had echoed through the hollow valley. For every new recruit who set foot in the barracks, the tale became a rite of initiation, that there was once a woman, armed with nothing more than a clipboard and a will sharp as a blade, who turned the tide of a battle even the SEALs themselves had not foreseen. Marcus Reed, the man who had witnessed it all, kept the stitched cloth of the hollow as if it were a sacred relic. It was not merely a souvenir from battle, it was proof of an impossible truth. When someone asked why he carried such a strange thing, he would only shrug, replying simply, "It belonged to someone who taught me that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you never notice." That answer alone was enough to send a chill down the spine because it struck at a primal instinct, the fear of what cannot be seen. But Catherine's secret did not end with a single battle. Slowly, fragments of her past surfaced not through official files, but through scattered stories, whispers stitched together over the years. They murmured that before she wore the mask of logistics, Catherine had walked the grayest corners of the world, the chaos of the Balkans, the jungles of Central America, the cities of the Middle East where shadow and dust were one. The name the Wraith, the Phantom, repeated itself in hushed conversations among seasoned veterans. They spoke of a woman who left no trace, who appeared on no roster, yet whose mark was etched across the maps of war. Campaigns thought lost that suddenly turned. Terrorist leaders who vanished in a single night. Supply lines cut without a sound and without explanation. What terrified them most was that no one truly knew which side Catherine stood on. Some swore she worked for the U.S. government. Others claimed she had been privately contracted by Allied forces for off-the-record operations. That uncertainty only deepened her myth, as though Catherine belonged not to any nation, but to another realm entirely, a realm ruled only by shadow and survival. At times, during tense breaks in Fallon, young soldiers would half joke, half serious, "If logistics is like that, then I just hope the kitchen staff are trained the same way." Laughter would echo, but never with ease. Deep down, they all knew. The name Catherine Hale was not a punchline. It was a warning sign, a code never written down yet always understood. Marcus Reed, however, was different. He never saw Catherine as a legend. To him, she was flesh and blood truth. The image of her in the night, her blood-stained shirt clinging to her frame as she walked steady and unbroken, burned itself into his memory. He knew he had learned a lesson he would never forget. It is not the gun, nor the grenade, but the person underestimated by the enemy that becomes the deadliest weapon. And then, with bitter irony, the hollow, the place that once breathed terror, became a symbol of vigilance and hope. No one looked at it as merely a valley of death anymore. In every training exercise, when the name was mentioned, officers added a warning. Never underestimate the silent one. The valley became proof that darkness does not only consume, it sometimes forges warriors who step out to change the battlefield. For Catherine Hale, perhaps disappearance itself was the perfect answer. She did not need to remain to sustain her influence. Every whispered story, every rumor patched together, every stitched cloth on the Fallon bulletin board continued her legend in her stead. A legend never written into history books, but carved deep into the memory of those soldiers who had once walked the line between life and death. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. If you touch that Barrett, you're out of the team for good. That's what Commander Hayden Greaves had said. But in Salton Valley, when the lead sniper fell, when every path was sealed tight by enemy fire, Ashley Marin, a medic no one trusted, stepped forward. Her hand rested on the rifle's stock. One breath, one shot, and the entire sky fell silent, just to bear witness to a truth no one dared imagine. Unless she touched the Barrett, she would be permanently expelled from the team. That was the only reminder the SEAL commander gave. No shouting, no threats. The warning was delivered so softly it might as well have been about a broken coffee pot, not a heavy caliber rifle capable of blowing a truck's engine to smithereens from 300 meters away. But she understood clearly. The line had been drawn. Cross it, and everything would end. The Barrett 50 calorie lay there like a sleeping predator. It was draped in coarse cloth, positioned beside 3 supply crates in the makeshift outpost on the edge of Bakersfield Valley, California. The morning air carried a dry, stifling heat, the kind of weather that made every sound echo, as if the high desert itself were listening. Ashley Marin, the nurse newly transferred from 29 Palms training camp, moved lightly across the open ground. A small scar on her left wrist caught the sunlight, the rest hidden by a carelessly rolled-up sleeve. Her dusty combat boots were neatly laced. Her stride didn't say much, but the way she paused and looked down at the Barrett was unmistakable, the gaze of someone who knew exactly what that rifle could do. No one noticed. In the chaotic canvas of the field camp, the hum of helicopters, the crackle of radios, the half-hearted laughter of soldiers, a nurse stepping near a rifle, wasn't the kind of thing to raise eyebrows. Not until her fingers grazed the weapon's body. At that moment, the air seemed to freeze. She didn't touch the trigger. No rush. She simply rested her hand on the cold metal, as if touching a memory. And then, the memory came flooding back. The image of her father who once told her, "Some things aren't meant for you, not until the world runs out of people sane enough to hold them." She pulled off her glove. Her bare hand settled on the rifle's body. Gently, calmly, utterly human. The Barrett didn't resist. It just lay there, waiting as if it knew the one who'd stirred it wasn't a stranger. It all happened in less than 90 seconds. But for Ashley, it was the moment she stepped out of her safe zone. A zone she'd lived in for 4 years as a medic, patching up what others tore apart. Now, for the first time in ages, she faced the possibility that she could end things. And then, a thick plume of smoke rose from the other side of the valley, the first explosion. No one shouted, no one warned. But by instinct, everyone started rushing toward the pass. The primary gunners had already fallen back to the second line. The recon system was jammed. Before the commander could issue orders, the convoy took fire. Ashley crouched beside the Barrett. No one called her name. No one gave orders. She didn't ask for permission. In that fleeting moment between chaos and instinct, she racked the bolt. The first shot hit its mark. The second silenced the entire hillside. The Barrett roared. In the sky, the recon helicopter circled. The coordinator yelled into the radio, "Hold on! Who just fired?" No answer came. Only a small, brown-haired girl, kneeling beside the rifle as if she still hadn't decided whether she was the one breaking the rules or the last one keeping them. And then she fired the third shot. Some people join the military to prove something. Ashley didn't. She just wanted to be there. To do something decent. That was the first thing anyone could easily believe about her, and also the reason no one thought she'd go far. Born on the edge of a poor neighborhood near the Marine Corps base in 29 Palms, California, Ashley grew up in a house without air conditioning, but always with cold water thanks to an old freezer her father tirelessly fixed. Her mother worked part-time at a library. Her father, a former Delta Force operator, never spoke of his exploits, but he could carve up a live chicken with a dagger faster than a sushi chef. After he died in an explosion during a training exercise, everything changed. Ashley grew quieter. She shifted from dreams of combat to medicine, even though everyone said she had the eyes of a sniper. When she joined the military, she chose to be a nurse, not because she feared guns, but because she wanted to heal. But that's when she learned a simple truth. In a special forces team, the healer is often seen as the weak link. In the team, she was the little sister. People liked her the way you'd like a tame stray cat, but they never listened when she spoke. When she suggested upgrading the medical kits for desert conditions, the commander waved her off. Later, when she asked to train with the rifle unit to understand tactics, they laughed. "You're a nurse, not Rambo." At the training camp, someone once joked that if you gave Ashley a Barrett, she'd take it to sterilize it. A cute joke, just like her. But Ashley didn't laugh. She just bowed her head and kept taking notes. What few knew was that after every shift, she trained alone. In the break room, she disassembled medical kits like she was cleaning a rifle. She measured the distance from her bed to the window like she was gauging a firing range. In a world where no one thought she could, she quietly prepared for the day when no one else could. She never told anyone, but once, she adjusted a supply route on a simulated map, saving the team from a fire trap during a drill. It was just a simulation. No one mentioned it. No one knew it was her idea. Because Ashley never sought credit. She just observed, learned, and waited. Every soldier carries something personal they don't want anyone to touch. For Ashley, it was a small wooden box, its edges worn smooth by time, tucked carefully under the bunk in her temporary quarters at the training camp. No lock, no label, just a dark wooden box that looked like any discarded trinket. But inside was another world, a world Ashley once belonged to and still carried with her, silently. Inside the box were 3 items. A thick notebook filled with notes on ballistics and sighting in desert conditions, a sniper's glove with a torn index finger, and a faded black and white photograph, blurred by sunlight, of a man cleaning an M24 rifle under the shade of an oak tree. Her father, James Marin. In the Delta Force community, his name wasn't unknown. But to Ashley, he wasn't a legend. He was the man who taught her how to step lightly on sand without leaving tracks. The one who used tin cans as targets and made her aim with one eye half closed. The one who could tell fairy tales while disassembling a rifle as easily as shucking corn. The summer Ashley turned 12, he took her to a training range outside town not to shoot, but to breathe. He taught her how to listen to her own heartbeat in the silence, how to reload her mind like loading a magazine. No one shoots better than someone who's not afraid of silence, he told her. He never pushed her toward a military path. But he also never hid the truth. You have the eyes of someone who knows when to end something bad. Don't let anyone teach you to bow to it. The day he died, everything shattered. A training accident, simple as that. An explosion, a brief phone call, a neatly folded flag left on the bed. Her mother, a woman of few words, said only one thing when she saw Ashley clutching the old glove. "Promise me, child. Don't follow one death with another gun." Ashley nodded, and in her heart, she believed she'd kept that promise. She entered the medical field as if seeking a gentler escape. In those early days, she tried to believe that healing was enough, that if she patched up enough wounds, Her own pain might scar over too. But sometimes, that scar throbbed at the most unexpected moments, like the sound of distant gunfire or the smell of rusted iron in the air. When night fell over the base, others slept. Ashley stayed awake, flipping through the pages of her notebook, marking formulas for wind force, bullet trajectory, and elevation. Not because she planned to use them, but because she couldn't forget. Once, while cleaning the medical storage, she found an old discarded scope. She brought it back, cleaned it, and placed it on her windowsill as if just to look at the view. But no one knew that every morning, she adjusted its focus, like a reflex. Something in her was still watching, not a target, but the version of herself from long ago. Once, when a young soldier casually asked about the old photo tucked in her notebook, the one of her father under the tree, Ashley only smiled. Just someone who taught me to look a little farther. No one knew how far those eyes could see. When the mission to escort the supply convoy through the red dirt near Salton Valley began, no one thought it would be the day every rule was tested. On the map, it was just a simple supply corridor. But the treacherous terrain, disrupted signals, and the blazing California desert sun turned what seemed safe into a trap. The recon UAV lost contact just 90 seconds before the first explosion rang out. No one could identify the source of the firepower. A blind curve, a silent canyon, and then bullets fell like rain. The SEAL team was split apart, the primary snipers either wounded or out of position. The Barrett .50 calorie, the only weapon capable of turning the tide from a distance, was left abandoned by a cliff near where the UAV had gone down. At the field medical station not far away, Ashley sat amid screams and blood, one man wounded in the neck, another bleeding out from shrapnel. Her earpiece crackled with static, intermittent calls for support. Amid the chaotic noise, a familiar voice broke through. "We can't see the targets. God, they're moving along the ridge." Ashley glanced at the terrain monitor, then turned toward the open expanse to the west where there was a direct line of sight to the narrow pass. A perfect spot for a sniper, if someone was fast enough, precise enough, and bold enough. Then she remembered something her father once said, something she thought she'd forgotten. A person who runs from chaos is a victim. A person who steps into chaos to end it is a warrior. She stood up. No one called her name. No one stopped her. Everyone was too busy to notice a small nurse wiping sweat, retying her boots, and running out of the tent. Ashley didn't carry a rifle. She carried her medical bag, force of habit. But this time, she slipped the old scope and torn glove into a side pocket. It was the only thing that felt right in a situation where nothing made sense anymore. The terrain was rugged, the sand scorching her hands, and sharp rocks seemed to challenge every step, as if the valley itself were testing her. But Ashley didn't stop. She crawled across the mountainside, where the sun blurred everything like a misaligned scope. When she finally saw the Barrett lying amid dry dirt and spent casings, her heartbeat slowed. The rifle was covered in dust, ownerless, but not soulless. Ashley put on the glove. A small act, but to her it was like tying back an invisible thread severed long ago. She knelt, placing the scope on a makeshift wooden stand someone had hastily set up. She adjusted it by instinct. Every movement was precise, as if no time had passed since she last did this. The view was clear. Distance, 823 meters. Wind drifting left by 3 degrees. Ashley adjusted the elevation, breathing slowly. She saw the targets. 3 armed figures, preparing to launch grenades at the rear line. She held her breath, gently, no strain, no tremble. The first bullet left the barrel. A sharp, clean sound, nothing dramatic. But from that moment, the definition of the nurse would never be the same. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. She lay prone behind the Barrett 50 calorie, as if she had belonged to it long before life forced her away. Her eyes locked into the scope. Everything ahead, the screams, the gunfire, the cries of the wounded dissolved. Only her breath remained. For the first time in years, Ashley's hands didn't tremble. No hesitation, no asking for permission. A deafening crack erupted from the hilltop. An enemy wielding an RPG was blasted from his position. In her earpiece, someone shouted, "Who just fired?" Vance the spotter had seen it all through the drone. He bolted upright in his seat, unable to believe his eyes. The only person kneeling behind the Barrett, covered in dust and blood, was Ashley. "Who gave you permission to shoot?" Vance whispered over the radio, not expecting a reply. Ashley didn't answer. She only adjusted her sight and pulled the trigger again. The second shot. The second target. The wind wasn't an issue. The range wasn't an issue. Only the lives of her teammates mattered, and the eyes that once learned to measure a pulse with her fingers were now reading the movements of death. The SEAL team below began their counterattack. Thanks to her precise shots, they regained control of the battlefield. A Humvee broke free from a crossfire, thanks to her eliminating a machine gunner holding the choke point. In 8 minutes, Ashley fired 5 shots, 4 hit their targets, 1 destroyed an enemy sensor. The remarkable part, she was still wearing her medic's armband. A wounded teammate groaned below. In the pause between shots, Ashley leapt down, bandaged the injury, administered fluids, set up a blood shield, and returned to her rifle position. Like a gust of wind, her movements were without waste. The hand that held a needle and the hand that held the trigger, neither ever stopped saving lives. A veteran sniper later recounted, "I used to think people like her didn't belong on the front line. That day, I saw how wrong I was." Greaves, watching from the command center, followed every move. He didn't order her to stop. He couldn't. Because if he did, he'd have to be the one to climb up there and take her place. And he knew full well he couldn't. She observed not just with her eyes, but with instinct. Each shot was a calculation of technique, medicine, and battlefield intuition. She didn't shoot to win, she shot to save lives. The battle ended as the sky turned toward dusk. The gun smoke hadn't yet cleared, but the sweep teams confirmed no additional casualties in the convoy. An almost unthinkable achievement in that terrain. A commander exclaimed, "That's something I've never seen a nurse, saving lives with both hands, one to heal, one to fight." Vance, after confirming the area was secure, climbed to the hilltop. He found her sitting there, shoulders relaxed, head resting lightly against the Barrett as if asleep, not from exhaustion, but because she was at peace. He sat beside her, glancing at the rifle, then at her. "I thought you weren't allowed to touch it." Ashley gave a faint smile, not looking at him. "So did I." A silence stretched between them, thicker than the gun smoke, but within it was acknowledgement, quiet, yet undeniable. As they descended the hill, her teammates didn't look at her with surprise. They looked at her with gratitude. That night, when everything grew quiet, Ashley sat alone under the moonlight and wrote a few lines in her old medical notebook. She didn't write about the Barrett or the enemy. She only wrote, "Today I used everything I knew to keep others breathing, whether with a needle or a bullet." The news spread through the camp just hours after the convoy returned safely from Salton Valley. No one fell. Not a single vehicle was lost. But what set everyone abuzz wasn't the mission's success, it was the identity of the person who fired the Barrett 50 calorie, saving the entire team from being wiped out. Ashley Marin. A nurse. No one believed it. No one expected it. Commander Hayden Greaves, a grizzled SEAL veteran with a limp from Fallujah, sat silently in the tactical room, staring at the screen replaying the battle's audio. Vance's voice came through the headset. "The shooter is medical. 3 times. Unchanging. Unmistakable." He recalled the moment weeks earlier when he'd looked Ashley in the eye and said, his voice near a threat, "If you touch that, Barrett, you're out of the team for good." Now, that same Barrett had saved the team, and she was the one who pulled the trigger. The post-mission debrief that day was packed. Everyone was there not for the report, but out of curiosity. Ashley sat in the back row, silent. She looked as she always did, her medical fatigue still streaked with red dirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal her sun-darkened wrists. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the eyes fixed on her were different. Rico, a renowned SEAL sniper in the unit, stood up to speak first. He scratched his head, glanced around, then locked eyes with Ashley. "I thought you were doing medical," he said, his voice half laughing, half serious. "Didn't know you were out there wrestling with death." The room burst into laughter, not mocking laughter, but the kind filled with relief and respect, the laughter of people who'd stood at death's edge and returned whole, thanks to someone else. Vance spoke next. No humor this time. He simply said, "If it wasn't for Ashley's first shot, I probably wouldn't be sitting here." Greaves stood. No one interrupted him. He looked at Ashley, then pulled from his pocket a challenge coin bearing the symbol of an oak tree. "This coin was meant for a formal ceremony," he said. "But some people don't need fanfare to be recognized." He walked over and placed the coin on the table in front of Ashley. No cameras, no drums or trumpets, just a metal coin making a faint clink as it touched the table. But that sound carried more weight than any metal. After the meeting, no one called Ashley the nurse anymore. They called her by her name. Simple, quiet, but irreversible. The following week, during a combined medical tactical training session, Ashley was assigned as an observer for the sniper team. A recruit asked, "Is she even qualified?" The instructor merely turned, pointed to the new sniper's glove hanging on the medical bay door, and said, "She's the only one here who's pulled the trigger to save the whole team." The next day, that same soldier came to the medical bay, not for medicine, but for advice. Ashley listened. She didn't say much. She didn't lecture like an officer. She just told stories about aiming, about breathing, and about what truly sets a soldier apart, not the force of pulling a trigger, but knowing when not to pull it. Every weekend afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the mountains beyond the base, Ashley swung the medical bay door wide open. Not for the breeze, not for the light, but because she wanted those passing by to see the sniper's glove hanging on the hook, a pristine, unused glove, accompanied by a small handwritten note, "For next time, hopefully you won't need it." It wasn't just an anonymous gift. It was the team's way of acknowledging something no one dared say aloud, that the woman once deemed the least likely had become an indispensable pillar. And that symbol, quiet as it was, stood stronger than any recorded commendation. As months passed, battlefield wounds began to heal, but the echo of the Salton Valley lingered in late-night conversations. Whenever new recruits joined, Ashley's story was retold not as a legend, but as a gentle reminder. Never judge someone solely by the role they're assigned. The following month, during a ceremony honoring military medical personnel, Ashley was nominated for contribution beyond rank. She didn't attend. That night she sat with her old wooden box, opening it once more. The photograph of her father under the oak tree still lay there, beside the glove with its torn finger from years past. But now, she placed the oak tree challenge coin, Commander Greaves's gift, inside as well. Gently, unseen by anyone. Not to preserve the past, but to close it fully. A person doesn't need to cling to victories if she knows she's still doing what's right. The next week, a group of young soldiers organized a tactical drill involving coordinated sniper and medical support. For the first time in the unit's history, they requested the lead instructor not be a veteran sharpshooter, but Petty Officer Ashley Marin. And no one objected. Not because she was a hero, but because they trusted she knew what was worth shooting. and what was worth healing more. During one drill near dusk, when the wind shifted unexpectedly, a young soldier fumbled, unable to adjust in time. Ashley stepped forward, saying nothing. She knelt beside him, gently corrected his stance, adjusted the rifle's barrel with a light touch, and smiled a smile warm enough to ease tension but sharp enough to keep focus. The bullet left the barrel. The target was hit dead center. The soldier turned to thank her. She just nodded, then said softly, almost to herself, "The wind is never the problem. The problem is who's breathing beside you." It was something her father had said on a dusty training range, under an old oak tree. Now, that phrase became a quiet tradition within the team. That evening, in her simple quarters, Ashley took out her old ballistics notebook and flipped to the last page. Her fingers still bore faint calluses from days long gone, but the smell of gunpowder was absent. She wrote one more line. "Today, Dad, I don't hear the bullets anymore. I only hear my teammates breathing steady." Under the dim glow of a yellow lamp, the page seemed to still. No one witnessed that moment, but it was the instant when the symbols of war, the beret, the coin, the glove, were closed by the breath of life. The next morning, someone noticed another sniper's glove hanging beside the old one on the medical bay door. No note, no one claimed it. But the entire base understood. Sometimes, respect doesn't need words, it only needs action. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.